Are you constantly blowing up your speakers with too much low end just because you're trying to get your bass to quote unquote cut through the mix? Well, you might be making a crucial mistake, but the solution? It might surprise you. Stick around to find out. Hello, everybody. Dylan Pines here with Musician on a Mission. And today we are going to be talking about one of the biggest challenges of mixing, and that's getting your low-end instrument to cut through the mix. It is constantly a problem because you need that low-end energy in order to create a foundation for the mix, but stray too far and you start to really blow out your speakers and totally oversaturate your mix. Now, before we go into solving this problem, I want to let you know we're giving away our entire treasure trove of cheat sheets, the entire Moam cheat sheet collection. There is stuff on everything in here that we've been designing over the last few years, and we want to give it as a free gift to you. We've got different cheat sheets on compression and EQ, volume balancing, reverb, delay, vocals, and everything in between. So if this is interesting to you and you think that you could really use this to help you out with your mixes, just click the link on screen or down in the description below to get your own personal access. It's totally free, and I really think you're going to like it. So let's talk a little bit more about this problem. Your bass isn't cutting through the mix. Now, here is the big mistake that everyone makes. They think that the solution to getting your bass to cut through the mix is either to add more low end or to just simply turn the bass up. That is the constant seminal solution that everyone tells you to do. But more often than not, that actually creates more problems than it helps. Now, what is the solution then? Well, the solution is not boosting the low end. The solution is boosting everything else. More low end is usually not the answer. So I actually have 3 examples right here that I want to show you. One that is a bass that is just, it's not cutting through. It's just not sitting nice enough. One where I turned the volume of the bass up enough to where it was finally cutting through the mix, but you're going to hear it's really overblowing everything. And then one where I did some EQing to get it to sound perfect. So let's start with our original, and I'll just start cycling through the 3. So this is what the original sounds like in solo. And now let's listen to each of these 3 versions. So you could tell, that final EQ'd version is the first time it really felt like it clicked into place. My original felt like it was, falling behind. It wasn't cutting through. The foundation that it was setting was pretty good, but it was just buried underneath a huge mountain of guitars. Whereas whenever I went over here and I turned the bass up, which you can actually see, I turned it up by about 7 decibels, which is kind of what I needed to do to get it to cut through. All of a sudden, that foundation that was feeling pretty good just got completely overblown and it started to take over the rest of the mix. Whereas this final version really fit. So I'm going to show you what I did and how I did it first. And then afterwards, we're going to talk about why this works and why this is something that you can do on a lot of different low-end instruments if you really feel the need to get them to cut. So here is what I did. It's really simple. I'm going to grab my EQ from this version. It's right here. I just made a large boost with a top end shelf on the entirety of the mids and the upper mids and the top end. That's it. It's really truly as simple as that. I did a little bit of gain staging afterwards just to make sure I could hear it accurately. But this is all the differences. Then I went in and turned up the volume just a hair until it sounded right. So let me show you exactly how I would be going through this process. So I'm going to go over to my original and I'm going to add an EQ. So obviously the first thing that I want to do is grab a shelf, just like this one. And I'm going to take it down, all the way down until it's right above the sub bass and bass section of the frequency spectrum. And that is pretty much above somewhere between 200 and 250 hertz. That's usually the edge of the lows and the low mids. Let me actually increase this real quick just to make that a little bit better. And then what I did is I kind of just listened to it in context of the mix, and I just started to turn up my volume. And I'm not afraid to turn this up aggressively because I'm wanting it to sound good in context of the mix, even though this would really make it sound bad in solo. And in fact, if I was to solo this right now and you listen to it, you'd probably be like, yeah, this is bad. I don't like this. Gets a lot choppier, right? But in context of the mix, this is probably going to help quite a bit. So I'm going to unsolo this, and I'm just going to start to turn this up. Okay, that feels pretty good to me. It still feels like I need a little bit of added volume. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to go to my volume fader. You got to remember, in order to get this to sit right originally, I turned it up by 7 decibels. I'm not going to need to do that this time. So I'm going to just turn it up by a few dBs until it just feels right to me. Perfect. So in reality, we've turned up the low end by only about 1.5 dB. So we've strengthened our low end, but because we have boosted this so aggressively, we've turned up our mids and our high end by, 8 dBs here. Then we increased the volume a little bit here. So it ended up being about 9.5 dBs of increase. And that was what allowed the bass to cut through the mix, not that the low end was any louder. That is the big mistake people make. People think if the low end isn't cutting through, it obviously needs more low end. Usually it doesn't. If the low end isn't cutting through and the foundation is feeling good where it is, it needs more top end. Now, why is this? Well, to explain this, we need to talk about how inaccurate our ears are. Honestly, our ears are lying to us. They aren't actually telling us what's happening in the real world. They have their own perspective on what they're hearing. They don't hear every single frequency of every single sound wave the same. And we can actually see what the ears are hearing with something called the Fletcher-Munson curve. So this graph basically shows us how our ears perceive different frequencies. Now, obviously, this is a super confusing looking graph. It's confusing even to myself. So let's start with the basics. Basically, it was discovered that it takes significantly more volume to hear a low-end tone at the same level of loudness as a tone in the mids or in the top end. And each one of these lines are showing the same perception of loudness for each tone. So let's say this one right here, all of these different tones, all these different frequencies, if they're played at this level of volume, so for instance, this is 100 hertz right here, if 100 hertz is played at 60 dB SPL, right? Then it's going to sound about as loud as, let's say, 1,000 hertz right here that's played at 40 dB SPL. So our ears hear 1,000 hertz, 1 kilohertz, as about 20 dBs louder than 100 hertz. And that is part of the reason why we feel the need to just blow our speakers up with low end, because we really struggle to hear it. Now, if this is still confusing to you, let's just flip it upside down. Now, what does it look like? Well, it looks like an EQ curve. And this is basically the EQ curve of the human ear, just at different levels of loudness. And you can see there's a large drop off in the low end. But the closer you get to the upper mids and the mids, you start to get not only just a regular amount of hearing, but you even start to get a boost somewhere between about 2 and 5 kilohertz, this little bump that's up here at the very top. Now, what that means is that the human ear will basically interpret lower frequencies as quieter than they actually are, but it will interpret upper mids frequencies as louder than they actually are. And we can use that to our advantage. Rather than having to really fight against these curves, these low end curves where our ears just aren't hearing things right, we can just make some boosts in the areas where our ears hear too well, the upper mids. So this is a technique that you can use on any type of low-end instrument if you're really struggling to get it to cut through the mix. You can use it on bass guitar, you can use it on a kick drum, you can use it on synths if those synthesizers have frequencies up in that area. You can use it on low piano hits. Anything that needs something, it needs to cut through the mix, but you already have a good foundation, you can use a boost in the mids and the highs. Now, of course, how you do this is up to you. I'm doing it with a large boost right above the lows, but if you would prefer, you could just make a large cut. We disable this. You could make a large cut with a low shelf at the exact same spot right here. And then all you'd have to do is just turn up your volume quite a bit more or do some gain staging to make sure that it's at the same loudness. And that would basically get you almost the exact same results. In fact, I've tested this. Both of these styles work the same. Now, it is very important to say, you need to make sure you're using a high quality digital EQ. We're going for a colorless experience with this. Don't do this technique with an analog EQ because you're not only going to add, a boost or a cut where you want to add, but you're also going to add a lot of analog color, and that's going to change the tone. We're not really looking for tone changes for this. We're using this more as a mixing technique, a trick, not so much something to make the bass or the kick sound better, because in fact, it's probably going to make it sound worse. But in context of the mix, it will make it sound better. Now, the other caveat is this. Where I have placed this is not a hard science. It's a soft science. If you feel that this is giving you too muddy of results, maybe you've just got a lot of mud in your lower mids and you really don't need any kind of boosting in there, that's totally fine. Do this at first, try to get a feel for it. If it feels too muddy, then all you've got to do is take this and just push it up. The low mids are usually somewhere between 250 and 500, somewhere around there. So maybe just take it up to about 500 and leave it there and see if that gets you the results that you're looking for. And that's about it. That's one of the biggest low-end mistakes you're probably making. And using this solution is hopefully going to help you to get some really well-balanced low-end mixes. But before you go, don't forget, we are giving away our entire treasure trove of mixing cheat sheets for free. Moam has been designing these over the last few years, and we're really proud of them. There's even a few cheat sheets that I use every single time that I mix. So if you want better mixes faster, just go ahead and click the link on screen or down in the description below to get your own free access. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and like this video. We would love to help you grow in any way we can. We make tricks and tips and tutorials just like this one every single week. Hopefully, you'll be able to become a better producer because of it. So that's about it from me. This has been Dylan Pines with Musician on a Mission. And remember, create regardless.